Beth, Courtney, it looks like I do see Tom, you, and Alan. So we've got the Finance Committee members here, and we've got Randall. So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order, and then does Beth need to get the attendance on this?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll go
officially.
ahead.
Yes, go ahead, Beth.
Are you ready? Okay. All right, I'm going to do the roll call. We're going to start with the Finance Committee just to officially establish a quorum, and then we'll move into the remaining attendees. Chair Chris Parker.
Present.
Commissioner Tom Griffin.
Present.
Commissioner Hugh Jernigan.
Present.
Commissioner Alan Younger. I seen him.
Present.
Overall Chair Randall Tuttle.
Present.
Overall Vice Chair Wesley Curtis.
Attending.
Commissioner Harold Day. I don't think I've seen him. Commissioner Harold Eustache. Commissioner Yvonne Hines. Commissioner Dwayne Long. I see him there. And Commissioner Charles Wilson.
Present.
Thank you.
I didn't know you were calling roll. I said something. Thanks.
I got you.
Okay, Dwayne is unmasked. Okay. Thank everybody for coming today. I want to get started by saying, Randall, maybe you could explain the significance of today's date to the rest of us, because I don't think we're going to see it again in our lifetime.
Oh yeah, 22222, whatever. How many twos do we have? And guy, like 40 minutes ago was 222 on February 22nd of 2022. How did I do, Chris? You set me up.
That's it. That's it. I just roll it out to you. So we've got a special meeting today on 2/22/22, but we did pass the 222 time frame. So I'm going to turn it over to Courtney, because I know we've got a lot to discuss in this short period of time, including some different options that we can maybe get some direction on going forward as far as a rate study. So Courtney?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Parker. So this meeting is really to discuss, it's kind of a follow-up meeting to the cost of service study that we had a few months ago, and really to go ahead and present some preliminary rate options. So they are preliminary because we are just right in the middle of our budget process. We haven't finalized that. Of course, you know, we're working with Lisa and others to get that where it needs to be. So, but we did want to give you some preliminary options just so we know we're on the right direction and we're meeting the pricing objectives of the commission as we move forward. So we've got Raftelis on the call with us. There's Elaine. These are familiar faces to the commission. You've seen them before, but Elaine's with us, Will's with us, Reggie, and Ford are with us. I think I got everybody on the Raftelis team mentioned. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Will. I think he's going to give the presentation, and we'll just go from there.
Thanks, Courtney. I'm actually going to start first, and then
Okay.
Will's going to pick it up. But as Courtney just did a really good job of kind of highlighting what we're doing today, which is really to give you the results of where we are currently. And so, Will, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to walk really quickly through the agenda. We're going to give you a quick status update of kind of what you asked us to do and where we are. Then I'm going to go through some of the cost allocation results. And then I'm going to turn it over to Will to go over the rate design options so you can see what we have in front of you in terms of those options and recommendations. And then if we have time, we may go over a couple of the other charges as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. The next slide talks about the status update, and you asked us to do a couple of things. The first is to perform a cost of service study, and really what that entails is we look at all of the water and sewer systems cost and perform lots of allocations based on different factors and input from staff. And then we compare the cost allocation with the current revenue recovery and see where we may have some differences and where we may have some opportunities to alter the rate structure to better meet those pricing objectives. And that's bullet number 2. And that's where we currently are. And as Courtney said, these are preliminary as you all work through your budget process. The third was to also look at miscellaneous fees. You also have other charges that you assess. And Reggie on our team has helped us benchmark some of those, and a few we've calculated as well. And then finally, we were also asked to update, recalculate the industrial high strength charges, which are assessed to those industrial customers that you permit and monitor. So, like I said, if we have time, we'll get to the final bullet here. But that's kind of where we are in the process. And today, what we're going to do is talk about the results. So as Courtney mentioned, we met, I think, in October, and what we got from you all was your top pricing objectives. That was really important because that is really what's guided us to where we are today. And when you look at those options that we're going to be presenting in front of you, what we've tried to do is to see if we can't alter the rate structure, even if moderately, to better address these pricing objectives. And the 3 that you came up with, the top 3 are affordability. The second was rate stability and minimization of customer impact. So basically, when we're looking at any rate structure modification or adjustment, what you're telling us there is you don't want to have very big impacts throughout the customers, and you want to be able to have adjustments that are kind of steady over time. And then the third pricing objective that scored the highest was revenue stability. So that tells us that there's a certain level of revenue that you generate from your fixed charges, and you want to make sure that any adjustment or modification that we do to the rate structure, that we don't want to necessarily hamper that. We want to keep that revenue stability. So those are the 3 things that we really focused on as we came up with these alternatives. So if we go to the next.
Yep. Elaine?
Sure.
So if you go back to the previous slide, I just want to know, what does equity access customer categories across customer categories mean?
Sure. That's where when you have different, and the way that your rate structure is there, you don't have different rates for different customer classes. What you do have in your rate structure, and we'll go over the rate structure, is you have base charges that are fixed charges per month based on meter size, and typically the larger the meter size typically is associated with a commercial or non-residential customer, and then the volumetric rate structure is tiered. So as you use more water up to through the 3rd tier, you pay more for that water. But then when you get to the 4th tier, it's actually declining. And that's for those larger customers. So when we talk about equity among customer categories, what we want to do is we want to make sure that when we're looking at our cost allocation and recovery, that those customer classes are equitably picking up their fair share of cost. And we did still look at that. And when you look at what we'll talk about in a minute, when we looked at these options, we do allocate cost within those different categories, and you'll see some of the impacts and some of the factors that we looked at to make sure that there is equity among those customer classes. Did that help answer your question, or was that a bit long-winded to get?
That was perfect. Thank you very much for explaining that.
No problem. So when we, and that's a perfect segue into this next slide, which is the cost allocation results. We do them on a lot of different levels. The first level that we look at for the cost allocation is between the water system and the sewer system. So when we look at those costs, If you look at the first chart, the right-hand column shows you that about 52%, which is that brighter bluish green, if you will, 52% is for the water system. That's the current revenue recovery. And 48% is the revenue recovery on the sewer side. So that's how you're recovering your revenues. But when we look at the cost of service, which is the middle column, you'll notice that for water, we actually should be recovering about 46 or 47% of the cost are associated with the water system and about 53% for the sewer system. So that basically means we're under recovering on sewer and over recovering on water. And that isn't too dissimilar from when we did the last cost of service study. And what we've been trying to do over time is, as we have rate increases, we've typically been doing higher increases on sewer than we are for water to try and bring those more in alignment. And those can shift from time to time just based on what your capital improvement plan may show in terms of projects. But that's when we show you these options, what we're trying to do is we are trying to bring that a little bit more in line, but to do it slowly over time so that it's not a one-time impact. And then the second cost allocation that we perform in the study is to look at the cost recovery between the fixed component and the volumetric component. And the fixed component is what gives you that revenue stability. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side, and specifically the bar in the middle, the current recovery from the fixed charges is 19%. So that basically means if no one used water and no one had any sewer flow, you would still recover 19% of your revenues. Last time we did the cost of service study, we had set a target of about 25%. And if you look to the right-hand column to give you a little bit of a data point, the red or kind of like pink area, 38% of your costs currently for the water and sewer system are debt service. So those are fixed. That's how much of your cost are fixed and associated with debt service. And then there's a few other components that we typically would put in the fixed component, which can be billing cost, meter replacement cost. So there's a large portion of fixed cost that can be recovered, but because we're trying to balance affordability, we would never suggest that you recover what you see here on the right-hand side. That was just to give you a data point of how many of your costs are fixed. And, of course, you can make the argument that you also have, great staff that has, salaries are a fixed component too. But the thing with rate setting is revenue stability and affordability, conflict. And so when we looked at some of the information for your system, so for example, we looked at water use over time, and we also looked at your revenue recovery, with the exception of some of the impacts of COVID. If you look over the past, 5 to 7 years, water use has been pretty level, and so has revenue recovery. Again, if you kind of exclude some of the impacts from COVID. So because you don't have a lot of inconsistency or I should say consistency in water use, and your revenue is stable, we would actually recommend that your revenue recovery stay around the 19%, because that will also help with your pricing objective of affordability. If we were to try and push that to 25%, it would throw that balance off. And historically, we might have been targeting 25% because it wasn't, in the past 10 years, you've seen more of a push of revenue recovery to the fixed component. And that's because historically there was more on the volumetric component, and has capital improvement cost have increased just because of the level of infrastructure involved. A lot of utilities were bumping up their fixed component higher than they had been. But we think staying around that 19% for now makes sense. And when you look at the options that Will's going to go over, that's what we've initially recommended.
Elaine, it's Chris.
Sure.
Tell me the date on the previous cost of service study.
Will, am I right to say, was it 2015?
Yeah, I think it was 14, 15 in that time period.
Okay.
Well, did we do one in 17? Now that I'm thinking about it.
I think we did. We've done one recently
Yeah.
in the last 3 or 4 years, I think.
Yeah, I want to say we did do one in 2014, and then we did another one in 2017, I believe.
Okay.
So we haven't, that chart on the left, we really haven't moved much since the last study.
Mm-mm. Yeah, that's correct. We haven't moved too much from the last study. And I'd have to look back historically to see when we've had rate adjustments, how many times we've kind of done a more across the board to both water and sewer versus, focusing on sewer.
Yeah, and I will just point out that for 2 years now, COVID, the impacts, we did lose 1 year of not doing any rate increases. And I think last year, I can't remember if I should know this, but I relied on Mike Quivisto to keep all this in his head. I can't remember if we either did a volumetric only or a base charge only. But anyway, we in essence lost 2 years of maybe meeting some of those targets because of how we had to adjust through the pandemic. So
There was a question some years back about what that rate needed to be to affect our bonds positively. Okay, and I see Lisa's on this call. Lisa, is that in the range we need to be?
As far as the fixed cost, is that what we're talking about now? Not
the fixed cost, if I recall, that we had at one time, and this has been years back, but a conversation that the rating companies liked the stability of the fixed cost when it came to the revenue stream. And if I recall correctly, you had a conversation about that. But is this adequate for what we do with the bonds?
I think overall revenue projected in the future is adequate. And I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head either. But I do think even though we haven't made that much progress in the last couple years, we made significant progress from where we started. And I think that was sort of the story we were telling, is that we were moving, upward in our fixed cost. But and I would rely on Elaine to speak more on the cost of service part of it. But I don't have any concerns. Let me put it that way, Mr. Long. I want to hear the rest of what she has to say because I haven't seen this either. But I think we're fine.
Yeah, and you're right, Lisa. We have made progress, historically from where it started. And I think the other thing the rating agencies look at is that level of revenue and the lack of volatility in it, which I think is stable. They typically look at your customer base, to see if you have a large proportion of use and revenues that would come from wholesale customers or industries that they may worry about. And I think even that proportion is while you have some, I think it's not unlike what they've seen or anything that would kind of raise concern. And again, that's kind of always the balancing act between,
right.
And you'll see it in a minute because you'll see some of these options that we have. The impact of raising that base charge, even minimally, what it has on kind of low volume users.
Mr. Long, I can tell you this, that we just had rating agency visits back in December, right before we issued the last revenue bonds that we did in January, and there really wasn't any question about the next level to get to, if you will, for fixed rates. You know, what we showed them was the performer we show you every year, and that is modest rate increases over a 6-year period of time. And there was no questions of our revenue structure at all.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Will, I think we can go to the next slide. This next slide is just to give you a little bit of a refresher on, you know, kind of the number of customers that you have by meter size, and also to remind you that, you know, the majority of the customers are billed bi-monthly. You know, there are some that are billed monthly. The majority, about 94% of them, are going to be at that 5/8 inch, 3/4 inch meter, which is mostly going to be, you know, single family residential customers, plus some small commercial customers would be in there. And then the remaining 6% of your customers are going to be at the larger meter sizes. And then kind of another point of reference is the average for those 5/8 inch meters is about 1,000 cubic feet on a bi-monthly basis, which is also the same thing as saying 1,000 cubic feet. In some of these charts that you'll see it's either use 10 or, which is the same thing as 1,000 cubic feet. If we go to the next slide, this is another chart just to kind of show you the distribution within the residential class. So here, you know, we're just looking at residential, and what this chart kind of shows you is at the very bottom of the chart is the 100 cubic feet. So the 10, that's the darkest bar, that's 100 cubic feet or 1,000 cubic feet. What that basically shows you is 63% of residential customers use 10 cubic feet or less on a bi-monthly basis. And a couple of other data points is when Will is going to talk to you about your current rate structure, you have a tier cutoff for a bi-monthly bill, which is 600 cubic feet. At that level right there is about 39% of your customers use 100 cubic feet or less. So that kind of gives you, when we talk about some of these options, we may have to kind of come back to the slide, but that shows you how many residential customers use, you know, right at that tier 1 cutoff, and then around the average as well. Will, you can go to the next slide. Now what we're going to do is Will's going to talk to you about the rate options.
Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, so I'm going to step through the modifications to the rate structure that we've been kind of working on over the last couple of months. I'm sorry. Just a quick refresher, and Elaine hit some of this earlier, but it's always helpful to quickly revisit the current structure. You know, we've got our base charges, which are separate for water, sewer, and then within the utilities, we've got a monthly and a bi-monthly charge. In terms of volumetric rates, we've got a 4-tier structure on water, and that it's an inclining block structure for the first 3 tiers. Tier 3 is our highest rate, and then that goes back down in tier 4. And then irrigation is tied to our tier 3 rate, which again is the highest rate. On the sewer side, it's a uniform volumetric rate, so everyone pays the same rate per 100 cubic feet. You'll note on here there's a couple of things in bold, and we'll talk about these in just a second. But in terms of sort of what we really dug into, what it was kind of twofold. On the base charge, it was the monthly versus the bi-monthly charge, and then that tier 1 cut. So, you know, wanted to lead off with kind of some observations and considerations. You know, we took a look at the base charge, And in our opinion, sort of the biggest challenge here is navigating that switch to monthly billing. So if Winston-Salem Forsyth County Utilities moves to monthly billing, which I think is the plan in the next 2-3 year range, there's going to be a little bit of a challenge with the structure between the bi-monthly base charge and the monthly charge. And that's that the current base charges aren't 2 to 1. So let me go back to the current structure real quick, just to illustrate. So, if you just flip the switch, for example, the monthly charge is not half of the bi-monthly charge. So if you doubled the monthly charge, for example, it would be $18 or $19 for water. Or if you took half of the bi-monthly charge, it would be in the kind of $6 to $7 range. So there's a little bit of sort of this issue to navigate as you move to monthly billing. There's going to sort of be this correction where sort of one charge needs to go up or the other needs to go down a little bit, such that the base charges are in harmony with each other. On the volume charge side, like Elaine, I think you touched on this, Elaine. The volume structure, in our opinion, is meeting your objectives pretty well. And I think kind of the big takeaway is that things have been really steady over the last few years. So I don't think, we aren't proposing significant changes to the volume structure. We are proposing a slight modification to Tier 1 to better address that affordability pricing objective. So this slide sort of breaks down what we're proposing on the volume charge side of things. Our proposed structure basically increases the Tier 1 cutoff from 600 cubic feet to 800 cubic feet, for our bi-monthly customers. And so the monthly, which is 300 cubic feet now, would shift to 400 cubic feet. They would still be in alignment with each other. But the reason behind this is to better align with some of the usage characteristics that we're seeing in some of the at-risk census tracts that we had identified when we did the affordability study, over the last kind of year or two. So we pulled in some stats from those at-risk tracts over here or the potential at-risk tracts over here on the right, and we'll pull up the map that we had created during the affordability study to, just as a refresher. But in general, the median use and the average usage in these, potential at-risk areas is pretty in line with, what we're seeing service area wide. So one thing we noticed within these tracts is the average persons per household is about 2.7 persons. And so what we did was we said, well, what if we, apply some essential and efficient water usage statistics from the American Water Works Association to a kind of an average 2.7 person household? What would that result in terms of usage over a bi-monthly billing period? And that's actually really close to kind of our average use of 1,000 cubic feet over a 2-month billing period. So the goal here is to kind of increase that first tier such that kind of the folks sort of in that median average usage range that are probably using water pretty efficiently, such that they benefit a little more from this structural change. And you'll note in here, in order to sort of increase that Tier 1 cutoff, there's going to be a little bit of kind of foregone revenue in there as customers are in Tier 1 a little longer, so they're not paying that Tier 2 rate quite yet. And in order to kind of recover that foregone revenue so that it's revenue neutral, the thinking is to increase the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 rates slightly to be able to recover that. And that's going to come from those, from many of your high volume residential customers and also your medium-sized commercial customers.
Well,
Yeah.
it's Chris. I had a couple questions. One is, can you estimate what the actual dollar figure is on that cost shifting? And then the second question is, as we're looking at Alan's question about the equity objectives on the pricing, is this what we're talking about as far as one of the equity objectives? So those two questions.
We may need to get back to you on the cost shift between the tiers. I don't know that one off the top of my head. But the answer to your second question, I think, is yes, because when we're focused on that equity between categories, equity in this sense is focused on allocating costs and recovering costs from customers who are using the system in specific ways. And what we did in order to make sure that change was cost justified is we did a peaking factor analysis where we looked at monthly customers and lots of customers who are getting into that tier 2, tier 3 range. And the peaking analysis confirmed that those customers actually have a pretty high peaking factor, meaning that we've got to incur basically we incur additional costs to be able to serve those customers since they're peaking. We have to make sure that we're able to meet those peaks. So we have to have certain we have to invest in our system adequately such that it can serve those things. That answer?
Yes, thank you. And I'll wait to hear what you get back with me on about what that cost shift number is.
Yep.
And we will be able to see some of the customer impacts in a minute, which I think may help show a little bit of that. I mean, it may not quantify it exactly, but a little, at least let you see with some of the average customers how that impacts them.
And this is the slide that we had developed in the affordability presentation, but wanted to kind of circle back on, with this conversation that we just talked about. And this kind of breaks things down by some of the potential at-risk census tracts that we identified during that study. And you can see here, in general, within these census tracts, we're seeing higher household sizes than our total service area. So 2.5 persons per household is the average for all of Forsyth County. But within kind of these specific census tracts, we're seeing household sizes that are a little bit bigger on average than what we're seeing throughout the county. And again, the average usage is generally in line with our total system. Okay, so here's the next few slides are focused on the rate options that we came up with, and there's 3 options here. The first is basically status quo, so that's retaining the current rate structure and basically increasing things proportionally across the board. This is pretty consistent with what you all have done over the last few years, with just percent increases across the board. To get at kind of the cost allocation stuff that Elaine mentioned earlier, the way we're proposing to do this is a 3% increase on water and a 6% increase on sewer for our status quo scenario, recognizing that each of these scenarios, it does include a 4.5% rate revenue increase for 2023, and that's preliminary. But we did want to have an increase in there, to recognize the fact that a rate increase may be needed for the upcoming fiscal year.
Well, I just want to, I know you just said this, but I want to just reiterate. So all 3 of these options do produce the same amount of revenue. It's just how you get there. So just keep that in mind as we move forward.
Yeah, that's a great one. So option 2 is basically to modify the structure based on the proposed changes that we just talked through. So for the base charge, the way that we're proposing to do that is to decrease the monthly base charge to half of the bi-monthly base charge. And that makes, when we switch to billing everyone monthly, that makes for a really easy and smooth transition there. But, you do have to note that there will be, the charges for some monthly customers will go down. And you'll see that in our customer index. And then on the volume side, the proposal is to increase the tier 1 cutoff and again recover that shortfall from tiers 2. The third option is really a phase-in for option 2. Basically, the thinking here is to keep the monthly charge flat, such that over time, as you kind of steadily, increase, steadily programmatically increase the bi-monthly base charge, eventually it would make kind of flipping and merging those two rates into one. It would make that a little easier to swallow in a couple of weeks. And then on the volume side, again, this is more of a phase-in of option 2. So we're still proposing to increase that first tier cutoff, but for this option, it recovers less from tiers 2 and tiers 3.
Hey, so Will, may I ask a question, please? If I remember rough numbers, we have 122,000 bi-monthlies and like less than 1,000 monthlies, 987, give or take. So the first 2 bullet points on 2 and 3 to me are trying to achieve a certain 19% of our revenues based on our readiness to serve. Is that correct? So I'm just wondering, since less than 1% are monthlies, doesn't it make sense to figure out what revenue we're trying to get from readiness to serve charges, whatever that 19% is, and just divide that by all of our customers, and that's it? And not be overly concerned that one is half of the current bi-monthly or 987 or slightly paying. Do you see what I'm saying? It's such 1% is, I guess I'm not sure why we don't figure out what we need from the readiness to serve the base charges and divide by all of our customers and go to whether we do it phased in or whenever we get there, we're just trying to get whatever our 19% of our total budget is from that base charge.
Yeah, I think you raised a good point, and we looked at, so we sort of looked at doing it 2 ways, and one way was to take the current bi-monthly charge and kind of cut it in half for our monthly customers, and that seems like the path of least resistance, and hardly any, there's a small impact to revenues, but it's really, it's really minor, just because of like what you said, which is it's only 1%, of our customers. The other, we thought about, well, we could go the other direction, and the bi-monthly customers could all pay double what the monthly customers are paying, that would generate a lot more revenue, but it would come at the expense of many of our low volume, small meter customers. So I think you're on.
Excuse me. Remind me what the bi-monthly charge is. What wasn't it? 9 something?
So yeah, 963 for monthly and 13.
Okay, so 1318. I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but the option, I guess, 2 was divide that in 2, and it is 659, right?
Yeah.
But and I don't want to speak for all the commissioners, but if 659 ended up being, I don't know, 675 a month, there's not a lot of difference.
Right, I'll jump in here. So, Mr. Tuttle, I think once we've got a couple more slides that show some of the differences, and
Yeah.
you're right. It's very minimum. I think one of the reasons we presented the third options really is because my concern was some of our commercial small meters, so small volume customers would see a 10% decrease in their bill. And that's not that many. So, I mean, it's not like that's a large amount of, or a significant amount of customers. It's just, you see a decrease in your bill instead of just instead of holding steady and then helping out, I guess, those other, residential customers. And maybe we'll get into, I think the next couple of slides will help you, but I see what you're saying. I mean, that's why we need direction. Well, this is why this is a good conversation. It helps us get direction from the commission. Maybe that's not, maybe some of our monthly customers seeing a slight decrease in their bill is okay. And, in our residential customer, our bi-monthly customers not seeing that same decrease. Maybe that's okay. I mean, those are the things that we need to talk through.
Yeah, I mean, I just pointed out that less than 1% of your customers are the monthlies.
Right.
Less than 1%, 99 point something percent of our customers are the bi-monthlies.
Correct.
All right, I bet,
Yeah,
but what you're nicely saying is, Randall, be quiet and let the nice people finish their slides.
No, I think you teed it up for us, so thank you.
All right. So I'll quickly step through kind of some pros and cons of each of these scenarios, and I think we did some of this before, but just for kind of additional emphasis, on the status quo, we'd see very consistent percent impacts for all of our customers, regardless of meter size or customer class. The challenge with sticking with status quo is we're not doing anything about kind of this monthly versus bi-monthly base charge issue, and there's no additional promotion of our affordability pricing objective. So in terms of kind of minimizing impacts, this is about as good as it gets. And revenue stability wise, we're still recovering that 19%, but we're not doing much about affordability for option. For option two, when we modify the structure to some of the changes we've put out there, we fix the monthly and bi-monthly base charge issue in 1 year. So it's just something to knock out and be done with and not have to worry about again. And it also is going to promote affordability through that, through lower impacts to our average residential users. So our folks who are benefiting from the increased tier 1 cutoff will see less impacts, which is good for affordability. The one challenge is going to be there is some variability in customer impacts, in particular for kind of those folks that you mentioned, Commissioner Tuttle, those monthly customers. They're going to see slight drop in their base charges, and then of course customers two and three, who we mentioned earlier, are going to pick up some of that, some of those additional costs. So a little more variability in impacts, but we're still checking some of our other important boxes. And then option three is sort of neutral.
Well,
yeah.
Well, it's Chris. If I could go back and ask a question about option two, and I'm kind of jumping in like Randall did, and you may be getting to this, so if you are, tell me. But as we talked about, the readiness to serve right now is 19%. That fixed cost is 19%. How would this affect it? Are we talking about it would go down to 18.9%? I mean, when I'm looking at percentage, how tight are we on that, since only 1% of the customers may be impacted?
It would be, borderline negligible. Well, I mean, when you're talking about over 100 million in annual revenue, it would be a very small percentage. Yeah, maybe
Okay, because I know overall our goal is not to go down on the readiness to serve. And we certainly can't get up to 25% because of equity and affordability. But I would just kind of want to know what that is. And if it's negligible, that makes the conversation easier.
Yeah, and one other thing to note in options 2 and 3 is we are including we are sticking with that 3% increase to the bi-monthly base charge on water and a 6% increase on the bi-monthly sewer base charge. So we're still, our bi-monthly is moving up in lockstep. It's just the correction on monthly that's going on. And again, it's such a small percentage of customers. It's a couple bucks. So, option 3, again, it's sort of neutral. Start addressing the monthly versus the bi-monthly charge. We're going to provide a little less benefit to our average residential customers as we try to kind of push down those tier 2 and tier 3 impacts. Our tier 1 rate has to go up just a little bit. But one of the positives is that there is a little bit less variability among the customer impacts. So again, 3 options, they all meet some of these objectives in various ways. But let's jump to customer impacts unless there's any other comments. Okay, so here's a quick percentage change summary for our for basically. So what we did here is we created this percent change based on existing and proposed rates under each one of these structures, and we use the average usage by each meter size to calculate bills. And what you can see is under the status quo option, the impacts are very consistent among customer by meter size or customer class, whatever. I mean, it's pretty much all in kind of the 4.3 to 4.7 or 8% range. Year over year. Option 2, kind of there's 2 things worth pointing out here. And Courtney mentioned this earlier, but there is the slight decrease as those monthly charges get right-sized for our monthly small meter customers. And then on the volume side of things, you can see the impact. The increases to tier 2 and 3, you can see those being borne by kind of those medium-sized commercial customers. So really, it's the customers kind of 1.5 inch and greater. And so you can see, again, it's important to keep in mind that we've got this basically this 4.5% underlying revenue increasing. So you can see these, some of these medium-sized meters will be slightly over that, and we've got some that are benefiting that are lower. And then option 3, where the big thing is holding that monthly charge flat. You can see it sort of gets rid of that negative 10% there. It helps press down a little bit on some of these impacts we're seeing from the tier 2 and tier 3.
Will, it's Chris again. Refresh me as I look at that 5/8 inch and 3/4 inch. Why would a customer be getting a monthly bill versus a bi-monthly bill? How do you differentiate those type of customers?
I think that might be a Courtney question. I think it's mostly residential customers who are getting those bi-monthly bills. Courtney, I don't know if you've got it.
Yes. So the small meter monthly customers would be commercial. So like business accounts, commercial accounts. All of our residential customers would be bi-monthly. And that's really the main difference.
Okay, so monthly's commercial, bi-monthly's residential.
Right.
Courtney, are all commercials accounts supposed to be billed monthly?
I cannot say that for certainty. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I can confirm that breakdown, Mr. Long, with our billing folks. But I don't know for sure that's true in all cases.
It's not. In my case, I have a commercial bi-monthly.
Okay, and you get billed bi-monthly?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if it was any standardization to it.
And I can follow up on that and see, but I do know that all of our residentials get billed bi-monthly.
And we've got a couple of slides in here that sort of break down the dollars. I don't know that we need to spend a ton of time, but I know that we were seeing that 10.7% decrease here from option 2. So I did think it was helpful to kind of point that one out. And it's basically, the small meter customer here, $155. And then on option 3, when you hold that monthly charge flat, the small volume monthly customer is really seeing very little.
Well, this is Tom Griffin. Question: what rate increases are you using? The standard break that we've been using every year to calculate these?
Can you repeat that question? You mean like an across the board type increase? I know what y'all have done recently.
Tom, I think they're trying to get a 4.5% revenue increase, and that's what's guiding everything.
So it's a combination of the 3 and the 6.
Yep.
So we're shooting for 4.5. Okay. Yep. All right. So what I want. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and it's helpful to keep in mind that that's the baseline here.
Back up screen, if you would.
Sure.
Well, go back another one. There. Back the other way. There you go. So we get down in the option 2. Once we get in larger meters, we're going considerably beyond the 4.5%.
Right. So for option 2 or 3, you're going above 4.5% because we adjusted that first tier to meet the affordability for, to change that tiered structure from 6 CCF to 8.
So if I understand, this would be a one-time event. If I'm a customer, a commercial customer out here with a 2-inch meter, I'm going to look at, if I'm doing option 2, I'm going to look at a 6.8% increase in my overall, assuming consumption stays the same, 6.8% increase in my rates. And next year, I would just be affected by whatever rate increase we had once we've made this shift. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct. As long as we don't, assuming that we keep the tier structure the same next year, which I don't see any reason why we would need to adjust it again after this year. So basically, the middle of the range, 2, 1.5 to 6, they're going to see higher rate increases, but then your residential customers are going to see less than the 4.5% increase because they get the benefit of that tier 1 being
stretched out.
Yeah.
So Courtney, if I could ask you, as we look at this monthly by monthly, where would an apartment complex fall in here?
So an apartment complex that's master metered would be
Right.
a larger meter, and they should be monthly. Now, if they're we have a couple of apartment complex that each unit is individually metered, and then they would be the smaller meters on bi-monthly.
But most of the apartment complex, and I think about apartment complexes because some people who can't afford to buy a house, so it's an affordability thing, would be living in apartments. So potentially, as we look about affordability, how do we take that into account with people who are in apartments?
That would be under the master metered type scenario, and not the individual metered scenario, I guess. I mean, and that's if we have apartments in our system that are set up differently. I mean, it's not, I can think of an apartment complex that's individually metered, and I can think of one that's master metered. So obviously if it's a master metered, it would be a larger meter, and they would, that particular one would see a higher increase.
Who makes that decision?
When you say how it's set up?
Developer.
So our standard process or policy now is to have them master metered. But if they were in the system before we kind of set that standard and they got put in individually metered, then they would be individually metered. But going forward, I know if we permit anything today, we want apartment complexes to be master metered.
So Crystal Towers, that is a pretty old complex.
Yeah, I would have to look and just, I don't know for sure. I'd hate to say one way or the other on that one.
Okay.
There's so many different situations that we have out there that it's just hard for me to, but I can definitely look at that one.
Yeah, if you can think of a way to do it, it's out there.
Yeah, that's right.
One other helpful table here is a breakdown of basically small to average size residential usage. And so what we've done here is we've got this table where we've got bi-monthly usage over here on the left, and then the percent impact from option 1, 2, and 3, you know, kind of over here on the right. And you can see customers who get, you know, up over that 600 cubic foot level, you know, they start under options 2 and 3, they start really benefiting from the kind of the increased cutoff for tier 1. So you can see kind of bold here in the median at 800, you know, and then it increases in the 2% range, and then that average kind of targeted usage level there at 2.5 or 2.7. So we thought this was another helpful table.
This is Wesley. Didn't you say that the 60-something% used what, 10 cubic? Is that right? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, no, you did. And sorry, we've been a little inconsistent. In certain places, we put 100 cubic feet, and others we put 10 cubic feet. You're on it. This is 10 CCF, 100 cubic feet or about.
Gotcha.
And Will, this is Chris. We are about a minute away from 4, so I don't know how strict we are on keeping within that hour, and I don't know how close you are to getting finished.
Yeah, we've got like just a few more slides, and then I do want to get, I guess, Will, if you'll go to the next Yeah, I think this one's good. I would like to get, a consensus from the commission members about, as we move forward, trying to set these rates and bringing you something for approval in the April timeframe at our next finance committee to discuss the operations budget. Do you have a strong preference how we move forward between these three different options, knowing that the 4.5% revenue increase is a preliminary number, and hopefully that's going to cover us for what we need for our budgetary needs, but more than anything, just our thought process and the structure changes. I'd like to get an idea of where the commission stands.
Can you back up on the screen and let us look at those percentages for the options again? Yeah, there you go.
Go back one more. Or not a couple more. We'll go to slide 17.
To the average ones.
Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Griffin, if you want to see this one.
Just to get a sense so that everybody can see options 2 and 3.
Tom, what are you thinking?
Well, option 2 doesn't quite go all the way that option 3 does. I mean, it checks all the boxes. And that's what I wanted to see, the difference. When you do that, you don't get that 10% drop. And you really don't see a whole lot of difference once you get up in the larger meter sizes. So, I think either one of those two options would probably work, but probably option 3.
So Alan and Hugh?
Well, I was thinking option 3 also.
Yeah, option 3, if I remember, is keeping it neutral. And I think that's what that would please most customers, whether they're monthly or bi-monthly.
Okay, and I think Dwayne was getting a phone call, but so Wesley?
Option 3. Yep.
Option 3.
Yeah.
Charles?
Mark, how are you?
I mean, option 3 seems okay to me. When you look at it on this chart, the 10% drop for the monthly users in option 2, I mean, the impact of that looks larger on this chart than it seems like it really would be. But I think option 3, like Mr. Griffin said, kind of seems to check the boxes.
And Chairman, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Chris, and members of the committee. I would echo option 3 as well, with the caveat that maybe we might be being overly concerned with our customers knowing exactly what their fixed charge is and what divided by 2 will be. I'm not sure very many people know, so I would focus more on the spirit of option 3. But this, once we move to AMI and monthly billing, is a once in a long time change, and let's get the monthly rates like they need to be, whether it's a little up or a little down, and not be overly concerned that we're taking 13, whatever it is, and dividing it exactly by 2. If that makes sense.
Randall, what I'm hearing from you is you like option 3, but it is going to take us some more work over the next couple of years in order to get to where we want to be. Is that right?
Yeah, I just don't know, and I'm not saying let's do any like subtle price increase, but I just don't know if people really know what their fixed charge is, and whether or not they would know if it was exactly half. And so if we can, my arrow is going over some of these percentages on all the columns in option 3. If they need to be equalized a little bit so we don't have such breaks, this is the time to do it.
Okay, thank you. And I got a sense from Courtney that the recommendation of staff was option 3.
Yes, that's correct. And I do want to, and it's really just to take a phased approach, but I do want to point out that Mr. Tuttle's right. It's really insignificant when you look at it at the overall total of our revenues. And at some point, we may have to, depending on how quickly we go to monthly, we will be revisiting this again next year. And it may be that we may have to do something a little bit more drastic, or maybe we hold that monthly base charge the same again. When we transition to AMI is when we're going to transition to monthly billing. So depending on when that project finishes. So at some point, we are going to have to make it right and make it half, make the monthly charge half of the bi-monthly. And this just, option 3 really gets us started down that road. It does not correct it by any means or get it where it needs to be. But it at least starts the process. Just know that we're going to have to be discussing this and making progress towards this the next few years.
So Courtney, when you say it gets us started, so if we kept on the same trend, would it take 3 years? Would it take 4 years? Would it take?
I don't know that we've really ran those numbers. I don't think we have, but I don't think that we can keep it at this same trend. We may have to do a little bit, something more, next year, maybe we have to, take it down by $1 or, something a little bit more significant than just hold it steady.
Why not have option 4 then? Go a little bit further on the 5/8.
So instead of hold it steady, just decrease it by, say, $1 or something. I don't know.
Some amount, yeah, a little bit more. See what the numbers would look like if you did that. Run another iteration of this thing by knocking the 5/8 down on option 3 a little bit more for the monthly and see what happens.
Well, we could look at and say, okay, well, if we think AMI is going to be in place in 3 years or whatever that is, hopefully 3 years. What does it take us? How much do we have to do each year to get it to half? And that really depends on the rate increases we have too. So it would be a swag, I guess, but we could come up with something where we equally distribute that.
I like that idea. Yeah. Yeah. At some point you got to get there, like you said, and at some projected time in the future, you have your meters in place. So we don't know for sure, but I'm just saying, as we're planning, what is a logical step in whatever that 3 year, whatever period is, to get us to where when we get the meters are ready to go, it's not a big pain to be at half. Yep.
Okay. Hugh, Alan?
I agree.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with Wesley's comments.
Okay. Charles?
I agree with Wesley too.
Okay. And Dwayne, I think last time you were on the phone, are you back at the? Okay. So I'm going to say in the interest of time, it sounds like, Courtney, we've given you a little bit of direction on that. Is that something you're going to be able to come back to us with?
Yes, I think that helps me, and we'll meet that for the April Finance Committee meeting that we have planned. So we'll bring that back to you then.
The April or the
Chris,
March?
The March I was muted. I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Okay. The March one will be to present the capital budget, so we won't talk about rates at that point.
Okay.
Unless the commission tells me they want to see us, a preview of it at that meeting, but typically we don't. We discuss them more at the April meeting. But,
okay. Well, we've gotten so much done today in advance, so yeah, I think we probably should be okay with the April meeting on that. Okay. Now, before we adjourn, is there anything else that we need to go over?
The only other thing that I'll mention is, there was a couple of slides, but just so you know, we don't have to go into detail. That Ref Telus is reviewing our other fees that we have. So, our surcharges, things of that nature. They're making sure that those fees are in line with our cost of service and what other utilities are charging. But the overall percentage of the amount that we collect from those type of fees is a very small portion as well. And so I just want to make you aware that they're also looking at that for us. But other than that.
Okay, so what I would ask, since it has been a lot of numbers, if maybe you could send this slide presentation out to us.
Sure.
From that. And speaking of numbers, before we adjourn, I asked a question of Randall at the very beginning of the meeting, and we're talking about numbers. So I know based on this presentation, Elaine and Will are very good at numbers. And so what we've got today, if you look at the European date system, a palindrome and an ambigram. And Hugh might be the only one who knows what those words mean because he is so widely read. But under the dating system for European, it's 2202-2022. So if you didn't have enough numbers, you got even more to think about. Palindrome and ambigram. Okay. Thank you all so much for the time today. I think this was a very productive meeting. And do we need to have a motion to adjourn?
Yes. I move we
Okay.
adjourn.
Tom moves to adjourn. We have a second.
Second.
Okay. Beth, do we need to take a vote on this, or with a committee meeting, is that sufficient? Can we do a hand wave?
I think we can do a hand wave for this.
Hand wave. Okay. All in
I think
favor
we can
of
just all
adjourning?
leave. We can just all leave,
Okay.
Chris, and then see what they have to do.
Yeah. Well, palindrome. Leave on the palindrome day.
There you go.
Bye, everybody. Well done, everybody.
Thank you.